I am so excited about today's interview because we are talking with two of the hottest, brightest writers and stars of musical theater. We're with Ethan Slater and Nick Blaemire. Oh, please tell me I did that right.
Oh yeah, you crushed it 100%.
They have a brand new concept album coming out called Edge of the World. Do most people know that you're writers as well as performers?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I of the people who know us as performers, hopefully at least some know us as writers as well. I mean, I think Nick has had more opportunities for people to know him as a writer. He's had shows on Broadway, and he's an incredible writer. And another show of his that he wrote is actually going up at MCC pretty soon, which I'm sure Nick will talk more about.
Oh, thank you. I have a show going up in January called Space Dogs. That's about the dogs that went into space in the 50s and 60s in Russia. I've been writing for a long time. And I think I'm really excited for people to meet Ethan's writing. I feel like this is like the third release that you've done in as many years. Is that right, Ethan? Like you've done some EP pop stuff, but this is like really the first musical that you've put out there.
Yeah, this is the first musical that I have put out there since my senior project in college, my thesis in college. I've been.
I'm sure it's great.
My parents loved it. It was. I mean, I also am somebody who's been writing for a long time, and I write in a bunch of different media. But this does feel a bit like my first opportunity to show people me as a musical writer, and not just sort of disembodied pop songs or other stuff. Yeah, so it does feel a little debut-ish.
The reason I ask is because Nick, even though I know you wrote Glory Days, your performances are both so strong and so connected that I tend to not think of you as writers, but it's so much a part of who you are.
I would say it really has informed, I would imagine both of our work as actors, and I think vice versa. It's something that, one of the things that's really tough about being an actor is the kind of passivity between performances. And if you're a creative person, and I think it's becoming more and more sort of commonplace that people are realizing like, oh, if I'm an interpreter, I might as well, create something for myself to interpret. And I think it really does. It does contribute to a deeper understanding of the creative conversation that's happening between a stage and an audience. And it's definitely helped me understand my role in a play as an actor better, because I can see how the weight is displaced as a writer. And, in a way, both roles are good ego checks, because a writer is nothing without an actor, and an actor is nothing without a good script to play. And it's really made that whole process clearer. So when I see an actor who, wants to make it all about them, I'm like, oh, you must not make your own stuff. So it's really been interesting.
I think that's so true. And talking about writing something to be in, obviously, we're on this album, I'm playing Ben on this album, and Nick is in Space Dogs, but we also have had this conversation a lot about the value in sort of playing your role in something and being part of the collaborative process and not having to overtake the collaborative process. So being able to be a writer who's on the other side of the table, watching the actors work and bouncing off of each other, is such a valuable learning experience, and also is, I think, valuable to the art itself. So there's definitely times when it's awesome to be in the thing that you write and to write for yourself, to give yourself opportunity to act and, flex that muscle. But there's also a real beauty in writing something and having other actors take over, or being an actor in somebody else's work. It's really, really fulfilling to separate those parts out, actually.
I mean, I had to convince Ethan to be on this album, frankly. Like, he was like, well, let's just get somebody else. And I was like, who name somebody who is more right for this than you are? And I understand the instinct to back away from it. Actually, I mean, it's something that I really appreciate and respect about Ethan. And I think it's something that's tricky about doing your own work, is that it can feel like an exercise in ego. And I've actually really shied away from it for a long time, up until Space Dogs. And with Edge of the World, I'm more of like, I did a lot of the vocal arrangements and I wrote the songs with Ethan, but like I didn't write a role for myself. And so I think Ethan, when we were having those conversations, was like, well, then we'll both just not be in it. And it was like, right, but this part is perfect for you. And there's something about, going into that process generously that that I think we were able to sort of listen to the story through Ethan's voice, and he's playing guitar, and there's just something nice about it, where like when it's right, and when it's wrong, it's wrong. And I think it's just about knowing it's a case by case sort of assessment that needs to be made.
I love the casting of Norbert Leo Butz as your father, Ethan.
Me too.
Did he have any input at all in this? Because I know that he also writes.
Yeah, I mean, he was such an awesome collaborator, and we talked about this is sort of like a backwards process in a way. Obviously we are familiar with concept albums. They've been coming out forever, and they're incredibly influential on us, like Jesus Christ Superstar and Tommy, and but this is still sort of a backwards process in a way, which is that Edge of the World hasn't been on stage yet. This is the concept album is coming first. And so we did have some awesome conversations with Norbert about that. And he was basically saying like, look, I'm into this. And I really don't want you guys to like shoot yourself in the foot developmentally. So in that way, like he really was a collaborative voice. And so was Lily, like Lily Cooper, who is also on it.
Does she also write? Because that one I didn't know.
She does, actually. She went to school for screenwriting.
She did a film at Vassar, which we went to the same. We've known each other since college.
Yeah. There's a really cool thing that you're getting at, Susanna, about finding people who want to collaborate and not just sort of like do what they're told. And I think that that's obviously something that needs to be met with generosity. And we were really lucky that that Norbert and Lily are both incredibly generous collaborators. But there are twofold things that they're helping us understand. One is that we don't know what it's like to be fathers, and Ethan or Norbert, I keep calling Norbert Ethan. You're the same person.
Thank you.
He's here with us now. Norbert is, just was able to immediately give the words a different weight in a way that we never could, and we always hoped was possible. We were absolutely writing this with him in mind, and then the way that he elevated it and changed things was only for the better. And then with Lily, it was the same thing. I mean, we were writing for her voice, and we've collaborated with her on a lot of things, on SpongeBob, and I did Tick Tick Boom with her, and we understand her musically and her personality. But then when we got into this process, we're writing about parenting and motherhood and expectant motherhood, which is obviously something that we have no experience with, aside from like watching our friends go through it. And in the middle of the process, it was a moment of total serendipity where the day that she was recording the song, one of the many songs that she recorded, sang, she panned the camera down and showed us that she is pregnant, and that she just had this sudden new layer of perspective on the material and was able to really help us craft something that we hope feels authentic, even though, it's not our immediate experience. And that's the fun of make-believe, is trying to find ways to intimately understand things that, are imaginary, and give them some real texture. And they were instrumental in making that happen.
And I feel like that, that's what's so important and beautiful about bringing on collaborative artists. And also one of the things that I feel like, I don't know if this is you're saying, Nick, but I've only heard it from you, is like, okay, well, we need to be water, right? Like we need to be able to be flexible and move where things push. And as a, you know, a writer collaborating, you need to be able to approach all of these things like water. And I feel really fortunate to like that we had that crew together that could help each other.
It's actually Bruce Lee said be water. So,
Oh, wow.
So I'm happy
Wow.
to take credit, but I can't.
That's out. That is amazing.
Isn't that great?
I believed it was you. You and
Thank you.
Bruce.
This question is to both of you. Who influenced you in your writing and what you look for in a musical and or music?
Oh, great question. I mean, you know, the greats, certainly Stephen Sondheim, Jonathan Larson, Jason Robert Brown, those were all, you know, people that I was listening to growing up in the musical theater space. And at the same time, my dad was introducing me to Stevie Wonder and Bruce Springsteen and John Lennon. And so there's a real merging between those voices that has been really a driving sort of force in my interest in writing musical theater, because I think it's an interesting thing to sort of surf the wave of change in a medium that is so morphing to the time that it's in, and obviously we can't write another Rent. Like Rent was modern for its moment, but it's now such a period piece. And, you know, and that's the same with Songs for a New World or Last 5 Years or Parade or, I mean, Company, right? Assassins, these shows that were modern for their moment and contribute to our understanding of what's possible. But then it's like, what else is possible? And how can we push our medium forward ever so slightly through the unique combination of influences? And so I'm very grateful to, you know, to Van Hughes, who I wrote Space Dogs with, who really introduced me in depth to David Byrne and Talking Heads and that whole vibe that like isn't necessarily, you know, at the forefront of this music, but is something that helped me understand how to tell stories in a different way.
Mm. It's really funny that you bring up David Byrne and Talking Heads. Like I was my dad for I want to say like my 12th birthday got me a CD of the month club. And so for years, like probably for like 6 or 7 years, long past the time that I was using a CD player, I would get a CD every month of like an album. And I was, you know, I didn't really know much. So I was taking like the suggested albums, and I ended up getting all of the Talking Heads discography and all of the Who's discography and like Led Zeppelin and like, you know, sort of those like classic rock from 80s and 70s. And then obviously like the Beatles and all that. But it was just like, it was this accidental crash course that my dad gave me without actually, like, he wasn't picking the albums. He like didn't. So there, but it was like this sort of meld of a gift. And I do think that actually influenced my storytelling style in a huge way. I would say that the music of Edge of the World is more influenced by Paul Simon, which again was my dad playing Paul Simon or Simon and Garfunkel all the time in our living room. And like I think that there's like elements of, you know, you mentioned Bob Dylan, who's also hugely important to me. So I think there's like that folk and folk rock influence on this particular album. But I do think that like the sort of concept album or like weird storytelling of pop and rock music of that era of, you know, David Byrne in particular in a lot of ways, and the Who, you know, really sort of shaped the way that I think about constructing an album and telling a story in that way.
With what is going on right now in London with theaters shutting down because of the COVID and Delta variant, and with 38 shows opening on Broadway when really, seriously, there's no tourism, do you see musical theater going more into almost like virtual film and more streaming, but like really honing that concept?
That's a beautiful question. And I think the answer is yes, without negating the essential nature of liveness, that like it's never going to replace it. But I do think it can corroborate it and collaborate with it. And I think we saw that during the pandemic. There was a lot of stuff that got made that wouldn't have gotten made in the way that it did. And I think you're right that a lot of that was, really by the seat of its pants. And there's more.
It wasn't done well.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It wasn't really done well, but after
it wasn't done well. No, you're right. It was an early.
Did you see the Van Gogh exhibit?
I didn't see that one, but I saw another very similar one.
In the Van Gogh exhibit, the thing that struck me most about it was how it turned into film in the room. And I thought, wouldn't this be a fabulous way to do streaming and to do musical theater where it's almost three-dimensional? And I think that there's a way for that to go there. I don't think any knockout live theater at the moment thing out we have control.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? I think you cut out a little bit.
Yes, I think that there's nothing like the live experience. But I think when you have things that are taking it away that we have no control over, now's the time to come up with what's its next generation.
That's a great way of saying it, because I mean, it's certainly true that, I mean, our producers on Edge of the World are Bonnie Conley and Stuart Lane, and they produced Warhorse and Gentleman's Guide and a lot of Broadway shows, but they also started BroadwayHD.com, which is a place that is really trying to get people to understand the value of recording a live show for someone who might not be able to make it to a Broadway show for $150 or whatever it costs. And the idea that in their hypothesis, which I agree with, and I think Ethan agrees with, tell me if you don't and we can quit, but the idea that it only strengthens our love for the art form to watch a video of a show. And if we get better at that, the way that the Hamilton Disney Plus Pro Shot came out, and the Legally Blonde and the Company, John Doyle Company version that was so great on PBS, and these things, they show the show from another angle, and they make me want to go to the theater even more. And so it's like there's just more to be mined there for sure.
I feel like that is a lesson that that we're also learning from the music industry in a way. Like, this is a concept album, so we've been thinking a lot about the music industry, and like when you look at YouTube videos of concerts, right? You look at or beautifully done documentaries about a musician touring, that inspires people to see it live, because nothing can replace the live experience. But as Nick beautifully said, like, these things can augment it. And they can show you a different angle, and they can get you excited about it. And it can give you a way to interact with material in a new way, not to mention accessibility. I mean, I think one of the things that would be a wonderful future for theater is if it's more accessible, so that people can be seeing it and experiencing it and learning from it and growing from it. And whether or not they can afford a ticket, to see a Broadway show, or B, a ticket to get to New York, and then a ticket to see, like, there's so many barriers to seeing live theater, that the more accessible we can make it, the better it is for everyone. And the more people will come too, the longer it will thrive.
Agreed.
I think.
Agreed.
What subject matters would you both like to take on to write next?
Ooh.
That's a good question.
I mean, I definitely feel pulled to write weirder stuff, to write more and more sort of off the beaten path. I love Edge of the World for that reason, and I love Space Dogs for that reason, because they're not like immediately straight down the middle ideas. They don't feel, immediately reminiscent of other shows. And I think that is just proof of all the different forms that musical theater can take. So I definitely want to continue down that road. I just heard a story about the Great Emu War of the 1930s, that there was like a war between the Australians and the emus that happened because the emus essentially like didn't want to leave land that the Australians wanted to settle, and they created like battle tactics against the humans. And it's not even that that is a musical worthy idea on stage, but it's like there's a spirit of transgressive, like, what if it was, you know, that I really like, and I think is a fun way to attack making something, as opposed to like, do you think this is commercial and will work on Broadway?
Sounds like you need Julie Taymar to direct that.
Oh yeah, totally.
Ethan?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I feel like you know, I'm just constantly sort of collecting ideas and things that I want to explore more, and finding the overlap. And, you know, I think that a lot of the, I mean, like a lot of the stories that I've been sort of mining recently have been about sort of grief and what, and you know, that's where Edge of the World sort of lives, is like this combination of grief and imagination, and like finding the intersection of it. And I think I'm really like, you know, honestly, I'm just like really fascinated by like physical comedy stuff. And so I want to find ways to tell more stories using physical comedy.
Well, you're wonderful at it.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes,
and it's
you
something
are.
that I really love, and it's something that like I love like learning more about. So I agree with Nick. Like I want to be doing weirder things that maybe make less sense on at when taken at face value, but like using that as a palette to play with, and sort of playing with theatricality and physical comedy. That's sort of what I want to do.
Yeah, surprising people. You know, it's I think the worst thing that can happen in a theater is if you're like, oh, I know what's going to happen next, and it's just going to be what I expected. And it's like if you can knock people off their center, you know, it allows them to experience it like a child almost, and that's the most, you know, permeable place to come from. And it feels so good in a town that is so arms crossed about new work. To try to disarm people, you know, feels like a good goal.
My favorite question to ask people normally throws them off. So I'm not trying to throw you off. It's just, I think it's a way of letting people know who you are. If you had to choose a song or a cycle of songs to describe who you are, what would they be?
Ooh, a song or a cycle of songs to describe?
I think I have one. Do you mind if I go first? I'm going first a lot.
Please go first.
All right.
I need to think.
So this is a weird one, but I think Floyd Collins. I love, right? It's first of all, it's just the best, and one of the more musically virtuosic things like ever written. And it's, I think, really about a searcher who gets stuck, and you know, whose search kills him in a certain way, and
or does it free him?
Or does it free him?
Or does it free him?
Exactly. And the feeling of being, I mean, there's a great movie, Kirk Douglas movie called Ace in the Hole, that I think also it deals with the same subject, and sort of deals with what's happening outside of the cave, and the fame that Floyd is sort of forced to contend with while he's in the most, you know, the scariest moment in his life. And I think that's something that I'm fascinated by. I just read a great quote by Neil Gaiman, who is a wonderful writer, and he was talking about how, you know, in school people teach you these fundamentals about how to read and write and how to count and whatever, but they don't teach you how to love, and they don't teach you how to communicate, and they don't teach you how to deal with being rich or being poor or being famous or being anonymous. And I thought that was such a fascinating thing, because we all want to be known and seen and heard, and we want to connect. And I relate to the idea of that in the life that I've chosen, and that we've all chosen in a way, just to be involved with the public in some way, but to know that like that's a a very delicate and often hostile and very tricky, slippery relationship. And I think that show is sort of dealing with that in a sideways way while watching this guy, you know, go towards salvation internally.
Ethan.
That's beautiful.
Yes, Nick, it was.
This is a tough one for me because I mean, for everyone obviously, but it's just tough because like now I'm playing through things in my head and I'm trying to think like, okay, well, what was the most influential, or like what do I feel like actually describes me? And all that keep coming back to is that there's this band called The Lone Bellow, and they released this album, you know, a few years ago, a self-titled album that is one of those pieces that, like, one of those like sets of songs that I find myself going back to all the time in every different kind of emotion that I'm in. And I think, you know, between the lyrics, which are pretty specific, and the sound, there's just something to me that's like, that's the sound that I hear in my head when I go through the day. And it's these three people who sing in tight harmonies, playing in tight rhythms on their instruments. And like, I think that what it speaks to me is like my desire to be a collaborative artist and to find people with whom to harmonize so tightly. And then within that, it's this album about heartbreak and love within that heartbreak. Like it's not sort of a traditional like we're breaking up kind of album. It's like, you know, it's the little heartbreaks of intimate relationships, I think, is how I would describe it. And so I love the big sound in the minutia and like just the whole way that album flows. So yeah, sort of maybe a weird answer, but
no, there is no right or wrong answer to that.
That's true. I was just so like, I was listening so hard to Nick that I didn't actually do the thing that I was hoping I would do, which is stall for time.
That's what I was worried about. I was like, I'm going to lose my thing if I don't just say it.
So smart. So smart.
Besides Edge of the World, what else are you both working on? What else should the audience know? What to look for? What to see?
Yep. So the next thing that an audience can see is that I'm going to be in Assassins at Classic Stage in the fall. They just like 2 days ago announced that it's coming in November, and it is speculated that I will be part of the cast, according to the news that I read. So speculatively, I will be doing that starting in November, where I'll be playing the Balladeer and Lee Harvey Oswald. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Super
I
cool.
can see why.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm doing Space Dogs. And then you know, we're both sort of learning about Hollywood, and I think it's an interesting question of like, you know, how as total theater lovers and guys who want to stay in the theater for our whole lives, you know, how to make a living. And obviously off Broadway is not a super lucrative place.
Even Broadway isn't super lucrative.
Correct. There's a real sense of like, you're doing it for the art that I never want to lose. And what I've been really fascinated by is that I've actually written a couple scripts that have felt very much things that I care about, that have sold, and that I like can't even say their titles right now. But one is for Universal and one is for HBO Max, and they both are just like kind of beacons of hope that like you know, if there's going to be a day job involved in all this, it could still be artistic in some way. And I think that's the real, you know, goal for all of us is to be able to make as holistically a creative career as we can, no matter what pieces you're pulling together to do that, to pay your rent. And so we've had a lot of discussions about film structure, and actually how I think this is interesting in terms of our conversation right now, just in terms of like how that relates to theater structure and musical structure. I think sometimes Broadway gets a little bit in love with the way it's been done before and uses that, you know, as a template. And I do think templates are helpful, and obviously film does the similar thing. But there's something about film that is really clear in its sort of 3-act rise and fall And for a concept album, especially, and especially one where we don't want to over explain and show rather than tell, it was really helpful in sort of realizing these are little 3-act plays, like episodes in a mini series that need to add up to a larger 3-act play. And that knowing the math of that structure is helpful in landing the magic of that structure. And that we've really been learning that, I think, because of film, and being able to graft that back to theater to make something that is really, you just want your work to be trustworthy, want your work to really keep its promise. And I think that's something that we have been really proud of in this process, is making something that feels like it lands the plane at the end of it.
When is Edge of the World being out? How can people see it, hear it, buy it?
Yeah, Edge of the World is out wherever you listen to music, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever, and BroadwayRecords.com on August 6th.
So excited.
So stream it or buy it or whatever.
And hopefully we'll get on stage soon, and we're having all kinds of conversations about everything, Suzanne, that you're talking about. Susanna, excuse me. That it, in terms of is there an online version? Is there a movie version? Is there a off-Broadway version? All options remain. And I think there's something about this album that is very visual, that hopefully, like Ethan's background right now, evokes the spheres. And so, listen to it outside under a tree and get a little bit of that. And then hopefully we'll give you a visual compendium at some point soon.
I am so honored and blessed that you decided to talk to me. So much for this conversation.
Oh, you're so
Thank you
lovely.
for having
What a great chat.